Hey there movie lovers, welcome back to Rocky Watches Movies. Today we're taking to the gritty streets of 1974 with the controversial vigilante thriller Death Wish. Starring Charles Bronson in one of his most defining roles, the film became a huge box office success, sparked endless debate and launched a franchise that spanned 2 decades. But behind the violence and controversy lies a fascinating production story, so keep your eyes peeled for trouble as we uncover 20 things you never knew about Death Wish. Author Brian Garfield was inspired to write Death Wish after becoming enraged by 2 separate real-life incidents in which his wife's purse was stolen and his car was vandalised. Although neither crime caused serious harm, Garfield later admitted that his immediate reaction was one of violent anger. He wrote that his boundaries had been violated and his property trespassed upon, leaving him thinking he wanted to kill the man responsible. While those feelings quickly faded, the idea of writing a novel about a man who never moved on from crimes committed against his family stayed with him. Producer Dino De Laurentiis was initially concerned about using the word death in the film's title, so posters bearing the alternative title Sidewalk Vigilante were printed. He later admitted the word made him uneasy at first, but realised it could also attract horror fans, so the original title was kept. Director Michael Winner, meanwhile, thought Sidewalk Vigilante was a ghastly title. Brian Garfield believed Charles Bronson was completely wrong for the role. He argued that the moment Bronson appeared on screen, audiences already knew he was going to start shooting people. Michael Winner dismissed Garfield's criticism, describing the author as an idiot. Winner first told Charles Bronson about the Death Wish script on the final day of filming The Stone Killer. Winner believed Bronson was perfect for the project and used the opportunity to gauge his interest before officially offering him the role. Although Charles Bronson liked the film's message, he wasn't convinced he was the right choice for the lead. He felt the character had been written as a meek New York-born accountant and believed Dustin Hoffman would have been a better fit. Director Michael Winner eventually persuaded Bronson to accept the part by suggesting they reinvent Paul Kersey as a more confident and virile architect. Winner also joked that they would all make a fortune from the film. Although Bronson was interested in the role, his agent Paul Kohner strongly disagreed with his decision to accept it. Bronson later recalled that Kohner believed the film was dangerous because it could encourage people to take the law into their own hands, as Paul Kersey does after his wife is murdered and his daughter is assaulted. Bronson, however, believed the film carried the same message as many of his other films, that violence is senseless because it only leads to more violence. Brian Garfield believed the film completely changed the message of his novel. He explained that Death Wish was intended to show that vigilantism may seem like an appealing fantasy, but in reality it only makes matters worse. By the end of the book, Paul has descended into madness and is shooting unarmed teenagers simply because he dislikes the way they look. Garfield felt Wendell Mayers' screenplay stayed true to that idea, but said the film's wordless ending changed everything. Instead of suggesting Paul had lost his sanity, the final scene showed Charles Bronson smirking at a group of Chicago thugs while making a finger gun gesture, implying he would continue his vigilante crusade. The scene was Michael Winner's idea, and although it altered the message of Brian Garfield's novel, it proved highly effective with audiences. The gesture drew enthusiastic reactions in cinemas and left viewers wanting more, paving the way for the film's sequels. Death Wish marked Jeff Goldblum's feature film debut. He played one of the gang members who murdered Paul's wife and assaulted his daughter. Looking back, Goldblum admitted he stood out like a sore thumb, but said he had no reservations about taking such a brutal role because it was the first film he had auditioned for and got the part. Michael Winner later praised Goldblum's audition, describing him as loose and brilliant. The adapted screenplay by Wendell Mays was originally developed with Sidney Lumet set to direct and Jack Lemmon cast as Paul Kersey. However, after Dino De Laurentiis joined the project as producer, Lumet left and Lemmon soon lost interest in the role. Both Henry Fonda and George C. Scott turned down the lead role. Fonda described the script as repulsive, while Scott declined because he objected to its violent content. Olympia Dukakis had an uncredited role as one of the police officers at the precinct, although she was paid for her appearance. It was not an experience she remembered fondly. She later recalled that Michael Winner treated her like a piece of meat during the audition. As it was only a day's work, though, she was happy to make the money and leave, later saying it allowed her to go home and express exactly what she thought of the director. The grocery clerk harassed by the freaks, including a young Jeff Goldblum, was played by Sonia Manzano, best known as Maria from Sesame Street. Manzano was dating Michael Winner at the time. The director had a habit of giving his girlfriends small roles in his films. Herbie Hancock composed the film score after being recommended to Winner by his girlfriend Sonia, who was a keen jazz fan. Winner recalled that Dino De Laurentiis wanted a cheap composer, and after listening to Hancock's album Headhunters, he was so impressed that he persuaded the producer to hire him. Herbie Hancock had just 6 weeks to write, orchestrate and record the 40-minute score for Death Wish. Despite the tight deadline and it being his first feature film score, Hancock delivered a distinctive blend of jazz, funk and suspense that became one of the film's defining elements. The soundtrack, or rather pieces from it, have appeared in numerous martial arts and exploitation films over the years, particularly in Hong Kong kung fu movies, where its atmospheric tracks were frequently reused without Hancock's involvement. Paul Kersey mentions that his father died when he was very young, a detail that closely mirrors Charles Bronson's own life. Bronson's father died when he was a child, leaving his family in poverty and forcing him to work from a young age. Both Bronson and his character also served in the military. While Paul Kersey is a Korean War veteran, Bronson served in the United States Army Air Forces during the Second World War, earning a Purple Heart for wounds sustained in combat. During the scene in which Paul Kersey is taken to a gun club in Tucson, a poster for Lawman can be seen on the wall. The 1971 Western was directed by Michael Winner and starred Burt Lancaster. The poster was a subtle nod to Winner's earlier work and is one of several small visual references hidden throughout his films. In that same scene, Jane Chill's speech that "a gun is just a tool" was lifted from the classic 1953 Western Shane. Filming on Death Wish began with the opening holiday scenes in Hawaii, where Paul Kersey and his wife Joanna enjoy the surf and sunshine. Those scenes were filmed in just one day in January 1974. The production then moved to Tucson for 4 more days before relocating to New York City for 39 days. Bronson chose not to bring his family to New York during filming, preferring to keep them away from the city's hectic atmosphere. Instead, a private plane flew him to his home in Vermont every weekend, so he could spend time with his wife, actress Jill Ireland, and their family before returning to New York to continue shooting. Bronson was known for putting family life ahead of Hollywood glamour whenever possible, and despite his demanding filming schedule, he made sure to be home whenever he could. Despite its divisive subject matter and mixed critical reception, audiences embraced Death Wish. Paramount was so confident in demand that it increased ticket prices from $3.50 to $4, making it one of the most expensive films to see at the time, alongside The Godfather and The Great Gatsby. The gamble paid off, with the film earning around $22 million at the North American box office, against a budget of roughly $3 million. Its commercial success launched a long-running franchise, cemented Charles Bronson as one of Hollywood's action stars, and proved there was a huge audience for gritty urban thrillers centered on vigilante justice. When Death Wish was scheduled to air on network television, its controversial content caused concern. In Washington, D.C., the broadcast was pushed back from 9 p.m. to 11:30, while CBS affiliates in Chicago and San Francisco refused to air it altogether. Most other major CBS stations across the US showed an edited version during prime time in 1976, despite Brian Garfield's objections. Garfield argued the film was dangerous, claiming several real-life vigilante crimes had already been inspired by it. He maintained his opposition, even though it might have cost him $50,000 if the broadcast did not go ahead. 4 sequels followed the success of Death Wish: Death Wish 2 in 1982, Death Wish 3 in 1985, Death Wish 4: The Crackdown in 1987, and Death Wish 5: The Face of Death in 1994. Charles Bronson returned as Paul Kersey in every instalment, and Michael Winner directed number 2 and 3. The sequels slowly shifted away from the original film's social commentary in favour of increasingly action-driven stories. In 2008, Sylvester Stallone planned to direct and star in a remake of Death Wish for MGM. Rather than simply recreating the original, Stallone intended to make the story more faithful to Brian Garfield's novel, with a stronger focus on Paul Kersey's psychological decline instead of turning him into a conventional action hero. However, the project never moved forward and Stallone eventually stepped away. After several years in development with different filmmakers attached, the remake was finally directed by Eli Roth and released in 2018, starring Bruce Willis as Paul Kersey. And there you have it, folks. You now know a little bit more about Death Wish. If you enjoyed the video, which I presume you did as you got this far, hit that like button and subscribe so you don't miss any future videos coming to Rocky Watches Movies. Thanks for watching. I'll see you in the next one. Bye for now.